All right, welcome to this explainer on Nicaragua. It's a place famously known as the land of lakes and volcanoes. And today, we're going to explore something super fascinating, how the country's literally explosive physical geography perfectly mirrors its incredibly turbulent history. We're talking natural forces and political forces colliding to shape this really complex, vibrant Central American nation. Think about this for a second. Geographically, Nicaragua is sitting right in the crosshairs of extreme weather and intense tectonic activity. I mean, it boasts the absolute highest elevation in its volcanic mountain range. But then, on the political side, that sheer physical volatility, it's been matched almost beat for beat by a history of foreign interventions, intense civil wars, and constantly shifting power dynamics. It's wild. So, to make sense of centuries of complex history, we've broken this explainer down into 5 distinct eras. We'll start with a land of contrasts, move right into colonization and foreign ambitions, then hit dictatorship to revolution, examine the Contra War era, and finally wrap up with modern challenges and culture. Part 1. A land of contrasts, ecosystems, and ancient roots. Let's begin by setting the geographical stage and meeting the earliest inhabitants of this incredibly diverse land. Way before Spanish contact, Nicaragua was home to this massive, thriving population. I mean, we actually have evidence, like the ancient footprint tools at Acaholinca, showing humans were hanging out there literally 8,000 years ago. And their settlements were totally shaped by the dramatic, life-giving environments right around the lakes. Take Lake Cocibolca, for example. It is the second largest freshwater lake in all of Latin America. And get this, it is the only freshwater lake in the world known to harbor sharks. No way, right? The indigenous peoples there, like the Nahuatl-speaking Nicaraguans and the Arawak families, they thrived in this environment. Friar Bartolomé de las Casas estimated the pre-Columbian population was as high as 1.5 million people. Though, tragically, due to disease and warfare after European contact, that number took a really sharp decline. Moving on to Part 2, colonization and foreign ambitions, the geographic divide. Because as European powers arrived, Nicaragua's contrasting coastlines became the site of a deep, deep cultural and political split. Basically, 2 totally different colonial systems took root on opposite sides of the country, and that created an internal complexity that, well, it still exists today. Over on the Pacific coast, the Spanish showed up in the 1520s. They established the rival cities of Leon and Granada, and their rule was all about direct control, forced labor, and religious conversion. But meanwhile, over on the Caribbean side, which was historically known as the Mosquito Coast, the British arrived a bit later, in the mid-1600s. They set up a protectorate that was based way more on indirect rule. They actually formed trade alliances with indigenous and newly arrived African populations, mainly just to subvert Spanish dominance. And, this geographic divide really paved the way for just a chaotic entry into the modern era. It was just a rapid sequence of civil wars and foreign interventions. So, right after independence from Spain in 1821, the country was heavily divided. And that chaos allowed this incredibly audacious American adventurer named William Walker to literally invade in 1855. He temporarily established a dictatorship. He even tried to make English the national language. Honestly, it's wild. By 1857, a united Nicaraguan coalition finally managed to defeat him, but the foreign influence definitely didn't stop there. U.S. Marines actually occupied the country in 1912 to protect American corporate interests. And as you might expect, that sparked fierce resistance, most famously led by General Augusto César Sandino, starting in 1927. Okay, Part 3, Dictatorship to Revolution. The pressure builds. Because following the withdrawal of U.S. forces, the political tectonic plates shifted once again, leading to a massive eruption of state control. So when U.S. forces finally withdrew in the 1930s, General Anastasio Somoza Garcia seized power. And he quickly consolidated that control by doing something drastic. He assassinated his chief political rival, General Sandino. From there, for the next 4 decades, the Somoza dynasty completely ruled Nicaragua. With early backing from the United States, the Somoza family basically treated the country's entire economy like their own personal property. They completely dominated private enterprise, banking, agriculture, all while amassing just vast, vast personal wealth. Now, as you can imagine, in response to that kind of immense, stifling control, the opposition unified. The Sandinista National Liberation Front, or FSLN, was founded in 1961. They explicitly adopted the name and the legacy of the anti-imperialist general Sandino. And what started as just small groups of students and peasants slowly grew into a massive, nationwide popular uprising. The FSLN finally toppled the Somoza regime in July of 1979. This victory brought a broad-based coalition right into power, and their goal was pretty clear: completely rebuild Nicaraguan society from the ground up. Which brings us to Part 4, the Contra War era, the Cold War battleground. Because that 1979 revolution, it absolutely did not bring immediate peace. Instead, Nicaragua became a central battleground of the global Cold War. Throughout the 1980s, two distinct factions fought a truly devastating proxy war. Let's look at the facts impartially here. On one side, you had the newly established Sandinista government. They were busy implementing widespread agrarian reform and huge literacy campaigns, but they also used state coercion and censorship, and they aligned themselves pretty closely with the Soviet Union and Cuba. Then, on the flip side, you had the Contras. This was a coalition of anti-Sandinista groups who were heavily backed and armed by the United States under the Reagan administration. Their main tactic was guerrilla warfare aimed specifically at destabilizing the Sandinista government. Ultimately, this era of profound suffering and total economic devastation eventually forced a negotiated peace. The conflict brought crippling hyperinflation to Nicaragua, not to mention a really tragic loss of life. That prolonged war, combined with the government's coercive policies, really ended up eroding the Sandinista social base. But finally, a 1988 ceasefire opened the door to dialogue, and this all culminated in the highly observed democratic elections of 1990. In those elections, the opposition coalition candidate Violeta Barrios de Chamorro won the presidency, marking a really historic, peaceful transfer of power. Finally, Part 5, Modern Challenges and Culture, the Aftermath. In the decades following the war, Nicaragua has had to navigate reconstruction, shifting political structures, and some pretty looming environmental threats. It's interesting. The post-war democratization process eventually circled right back toward a highly personalized and centralized government structure. The 1990s saw a lot of neoliberal reforms and a shift toward open opposition politics. However, leading up to the 2006 elections, there was this assembly pact made between FSLN leader Daniel Ortega and Arnoldo Alemán. And that essentially created a power-sharing dynamic over state institutions. So once Ortega returned to the presidency, authority was just gradually consolidated all over again. According to our sources, recent years have unfortunately been marked by the targeting of judicial independence and the heavy repression of social protests, which really signals a deep institutional shift. Now let's talk numbers for a second. 24.9%. That was the Gini coefficient, which is basically a measure of inequality, for Nicaragua back in 2014. Why does that matter to us? Well, to put that into perspective, in 1993, that number was 35%. So that represents a massive reduction in inequality over just 2 decades. It's a real testament to various social and economic reforms. But actually, we need to balance that out, because despite that closing gap, poverty remains a huge enduring issue. Roughly 40% of the population is still living below the poverty line. And sadly, that poverty is deeply, deeply intertwined with environmental vulnerability. This is a crucial point. Despite producing less than 0.1% of global greenhouse gas emissions, Nicaragua's geography puts it directly in the crosshairs of severe climate change impacts. It is currently ranked as the second most vulnerable country to climate change in all of Latin America. The nation is facing severe increases in devastating cyclones, abrupt floods, and drought-induced forest fires. And this threatens literally everything, not just the human population and agriculture, but also the nation's absolutely vital biodiversity, including those massive wetlands and unique volcanic lakes we talked about earlier. But hey, amidst all these political and environmental struggles, we absolutely must talk about the sheer resilience of the Nicaraguan people, which is expressed so vividly in their culture. It's a rich tapestry, and perhaps it's best seen in their massive, culturally syncretic street festivals. Take the Fiesta de Santo Domingo in Managua. It features a mile-long entourage of dancers, artists, and horsemen. Or in Masaya, where the Fiestas de la Merced literally brings the entire city into the streets for nocturnal dancing and music. These aren't just parties, right? They are a profound blending of indigenous, African, and European traditions, living and breathing together in the modern day. As one observer so perfectly captured it, they said, "Rarely does theater emerge from a single culture. As culture arises from the synthesis of a multiple historical past, so also theater draws from many sources." And that is spot on. Much like the land itself, literally forced together by shifting tectonic plates, Nicaraguan culture is this brilliant, beautiful synthesis of indigenous roots, European colonization, African influence, and just the constant influx of global pressures. So, as we wrap up this explainer, I want to leave you with a thought to chew on. How does a nation that has been repeatedly fractured by foreign powers, internal conflict, and devastating natural disasters continue to forge such a vibrant, unified cultural identity? It's pretty amazing. Consider how the resilience born from this intense land of lakes and volcanoes really continues to define the Nicaraguan people today. Thanks so much for joining me, and I hope this provided a really clear, engaging window into the seismic shifts of Nicaragua's history.